Good afternoon. We're pleased today to welcome House Republican Leader Kevin McCarthy to campus. Very much appreciate him coming. We just had a great Axe Files discussion downstairs just to get the ball rolling. And a special thank you to David Wasserman, who has been a spectacular fellow at the IOP this quarter. There are two very, very hard things about this job. One is to say goodbye to all of you guys who are graduating from the university, and the other is to say goodbye to great fellows like David. So we're very, very grateful to him and grateful to him for bringing Leader McCarthy here. Just a couple of announcements. On Tuesday, I'll be recording a live Axe Files episode with Bob Woodward of the Washington Post. Next Thursday, we'll welcome Patrick Gaspard, former U.S. Ambassador to South Africa and current president of Open Societies, Foundations for a Conversation on Global Trends Toward Nationalism and Isolationism. And on Wednesday, June 5th, General David Petraeus will be in conversation with Natasha Bertrand of Politico. And you can find out more about all of our upcoming events on our website at politics.uchicago.edu. We will open the floor to questions, as always, from the audience. Please line up behind the microphone in the aisle, and remember, everyone is welcome at the mic. That everyone means men, women. Is that what we're getting at? Okay. As usual, as usual, we give priority for the first three questions to be asked by our students, and as always, a question ends in a question mark. Please make sure your phones are on silent. And here to formally introduce our speaker is Evita Duffy. Evita is a first year from Wausau, Wisconsin. During her time on campus, she's been an events ambassador at the IOP and is now a board member of UChicago College Republicans, who are well represented here today. Please join me in welcoming Evita to the podium.
It is my pleasure to introduce Republican Leader Kevin McCarthy, who represents the 23rd District of California. When Leader McCarthy was 19 years old, something amazing happened to him. He won the lottery. He used his lottery winnings to start a deli to help pay his way through college. The experience of being a young entrepreneur and small business owner has influenced his politics and ideas ever since. Early on, Congressman McCarthy also chaired the California Young Republicans. Congressman, I know what it's like to be a college Republican on campus. In 2002, Congressman McCarthy was elected to the California State Assembly. In 2006, he was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. Representative McCarthy helped orchestrate a Republican takeover to the U.S. House in the 2010 midterm elections, a historic wave that brought 85 new Republican leader members to Congress to Washington, including my dad. In 2011, Congressman McCarthy was elected by his colleagues to serve as Majority Whip of the United States House of Representatives. In his role as Majority Whip, he led efforts to block the largest tax increase in American history, cut government spending, and decrease government regulations. In 2016, Donald Trump was elected, and together with President Trump, Representative Kevin McCarthy is leading the fight to combat socialism in America and bring entrepreneurial capitalism and free and fair trade to America's workers. Thanks to these conservative economic policies, Americans are enjoying historic prosperity and a blue-collar recovery that is reviving America's heartland and Rust Belt. Today, Leader McCarthy is back to orchestrating another Republican takeover in the House in 2020. He'll be sharing his insights into his strategy and the challenges he faces in this new political environment. Today's conversation will be moderated by David Wasserman, House editor of the influential The Cook Political Report, where he is responsible for analyzing U.S. House races and is recognized as one of the nation's top election forecasters. Both the Democrat and Republican members of Congress respect his commitment to the facts and the data and his unbiased analysis. We're lucky to have him as a resident Pritzker Fellow at the IOP this quarter. Please join me in welcoming David Wasserman and future Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy.
Great job. Thank you very much, Leader McCarthy, for coming to the conservative hotbed of Chicago.
All right.
Just got the Axe Files treatment. I want to ask you first and foremost, we first got to know each other in 2009 when you were a sophomore in Congress and the recruitment chair for the NRCC. And you told me very early on when we met that you thought Republicans could pick up 40 seats and take back the House in 2010. And that sounded crazy at the time. And you were only wrong on one count. You guys ended up picking up 63 seats in November of 2010. And those were heady days. You and Paul Ryan and Eric Cantor wrote a book at the time called Young Guns, Conservative Leaders for a New Generation. And the 2018 election went a little bit differently. And now you're the last one standing of that trio. What the heck happened? What's your analysis?
The most important thing you should realize in politics is timing. And why I told David that then, I was out recruiting and I could see what was happening on the ground. And, back in the day, I'm older than most all of you, there was this book before the internet called Megatrends. And Megatrends, in essence, you'd cut articles, you'd put them in piles, and you'd see what's moving in others. You could get a real feel. And with the internet and other things happened quicker. Now, what happened in this election? It's not one factor about this election, but there's a couple. History always plays something to it. And in history, there's about four main things. In history, the party in power, meaning whoever wins the White House in an off-year election, on average would lose 30 seats, something that David would remind me of often, and I tell him we're going to beat that trend, and we didn't beat that trend. 23 would have taken them into the majority. Too many retirements on the Republican side. We had 41 members retire. And that's a bad time to retire because you're retiring with wind in your face. And what happens when someone retires, like I got an instance in one race, he had a couple $1 million, he could have fought, he could have won, or he would have lost, but the Democrats would have spent a lot of money just on that seat. Once he retired, that seat was gone, and the battle lines came closer down. Democrats did some things very smart. They recruited well. The quality of their candidates was much better than it had been in the past. They recruited completely. There's a couple metrics and numbers you should always look at. No one ever takes a majority from a minority unless they have 420 candidates. Normally, people would have about 380. I studied this before 2010, so I would make all these metrics. Another one was you have to have one professional athlete. Odd fact, but so I recruited 3 professional athletes in 2010, and I came down to 1 Runyon. I call them every day. It's all up to you, right? But Democrats did something else too. They went after election law. They got redistricting done in Pennsylvania ahead of time. And when they drew those new seats, we'd already going to lose 3 to start out with. In Maine, they changed the election law for Maine. It now only holds up to federal office. There's only 2 seats in Maine. In Maine, you don't vote for one person. You rank them. So Bruce Poliquin, who's the congressman, came in first, but he didn't hit 50%. So what they do is they take the person who came in last, and they took everyone they voted for second, and that person. So the person who came in second now gets to be the member, the congressional member. In California, there was 2 things that was pretty radically different that affected an election. Same-day voter registration, you don't have to do any ID, but it helps more people turn out. In the provisionals, you can't count who's coming. But we changed what we did with absentee ballots. And this concerns me, not from a perspective as a Republican, but just from an integrity of a election, because this is an area that somebody could do something wrong if they want to. It's an opening, like if you had a software, this is the place that someone would come in back door. A lot of people vote absentee in California. We have really, because we want people to vote. And how you would do it, when you register, you could check, I want to be a permanent absentee, so the ballot's just always going to come to you. And you get the ballot, and you get to vote at home, and you fill it into the envelope, and in the back, what you do is you would sign it, and you would send it back. Or your family would take it in, and they have to say specifically who they are, and they take it in. Well, when you mail it in, your ballot doesn't count yet. They take your signature, they bring up on the fish your voter registration, and they check to see if it's the same person, then your ballot is open. When that law changed, what you can do now is you can go to the door and you can ring the doorbell and say, I know you got an absentee, I'm here to pick it up. Democrats did that and we didn't, and what transpired, now we were going to lose seats. We lost 7, but I don't think we would have lost 7. Because I'll give you an example. David Valadao in the seat next to me, the day after the election, he was ahead by 6 points. But he ended up losing by less than 900. LA Times has gone through that there's a problem. People would utilize this in an area for some other races down below. We just had a race in North Carolina where the race went away because we felt that there were 500 people who harvested a ballot, even though that wouldn't change the outcome of the election of 900, but we null and void that election, now we're having a special. But in California, you could do it throughout.
I get these issues concerning election administration, but I guess the overarching
I'm not
results
done.
in 2018.
Money.
But I got to ask you though, because you've insinuated that perhaps it was a mistake to fully repeal and replace the ACA rather
those are
than
two more
carve
points.
out. Okay.
Okay, two more.
Okay.
First, you got to have people turn out for you. Give Democrat credits. If you take the number of Democrats who voted versus the number of Republicans, 8% higher. But if you take the 74 swing seats that make up the majority determined by this man over here, the difference between Republican and Democrat turnout was 1%. Resources, Democrats had greater advantage because they had greater intensity. They had roughly about 250 million more. Bloomberg's money made a difference because it's 110. He did 54 and 1. But when you go to issues, issues matter. We won the economy. We even won when it came to immigration. We even won when it came to social issues, but we lost one issue overwhelmingly, and that was health care. We lost health care by 66 points. And if you go back in 2010, one of the reasons we won was health care. And if you look at health care, when President Obama passed Obamacare, he made this one statement that's pretty defining in that election. If you like your doctor, you could keep it. Well, that came to not be true, and what voters were frustrated was you were taking something away from us. When we were going to pass health care, we got to a point and we had to stop and we had to take this amendment. Now, this amendment, people will argue that somehow dealt with pre-existing conditions. It didn't. We protected pre-existing conditions, but we're allowing states, because states are great pilot programs to offer different health care, right? If you want car insurance or motorcycle insurance, you can call Geico, right? This little, what is it, is it a lizard or whatever? He can sell you different options. You have different options. So we thought states could do different options. But the Democrats utilized that and ran it in every race, even people who weren't even in Congress, and made this statement that we were taking away pre-existing conditions. So we were taking something people felt from the voters, even though we stood that, no, we were protecting pre-existing conditions. Had we not lost that by 66 points, if you're somewhere around 30 or 20, the outcome would have been different. But that's the pretty big makeup. So the way I look at it, we have such great room for improvement, right? So it's nothing but moving upward.
Yeah. So
we lost the suburban areas, so we lost women and college educated overwhelmingly. So even though in the last presidential we didn't lose any of those, this time we did.
Republicans had 2 years of unified control with President Trump in the White House. The president ran on rebuilding America's roads, bridges, and airports, but we didn't see an infrastructure package. What went wrong there? And then the other missed opportunity I want to ask you about is there was a discharge petition that your friend Jeff Denham, who also represented the Central Valley, Carlos Curbelo, who was a guest at one of my seminars.
He's a wonderful person. Both of them are wonderful people.
To bring a comprehensive immigration reform bill to the floor that would have married permanent status for DACA kids with a whole lot more money for border security and a guest worker program that the ag community would have liked. And yet you and other Republican leaders were opposed to that. Wasn't that a huge missed opportunity to win swing voters?
Two premise. I disagree. One, I kind of disagree with both questions in a manner in which you said it.
Okay.
Most people believe you have total control. Majority in the House, majority in the Senate, and the president. Why couldn't you do everything? That's not how the structure works. You have to have 60 votes in the Senate. So even though that you think you have the majority, you don't in a manner. It gets frustrating. Within our own party, much as you look at the majority party now, there's different wings. We had a challenge. Why we couldn't pass that health care bill the first, there's different pockets that gave us challenges. Should we have started with infrastructure? Should we have started with tax? And one of the things you said, like we failed or missed, I mean, I look from a perspective, we didn't do everything we wanted to do, but right now, any of you graduating, you're graduating in the best economy we've had in the last 50 years. You don't have to worry that you have to move back home. You're going to get a job. Unemployment's the lowest level, and it doesn't matter where you come from in life. So I think we achieved some really big things. Did I want to achieve more? Yeah. I think we looked at healthcare first because part of the element was you thought you'd have more resources if you did from healthcare might be an easier one because we had been talking about that. We've been working on that ahead of time. And then we could go to tax. Infrastructure was something the president wanted to do. That takes money to do a lot. I think we thought we would get these things done there, and having slowed down here, slowed the process down. Immigration.
But the president has said that he wants a $2 trillion infrastructure package. How would you propose paying for it? Because the pay for is really the issue that's
the pay for is what's happening.
Killing the talks between
Yeah.
the congressional leaders and the president.
But let me be fair, I never said I wanted $2 trillion infrastructure, so I don't have to pay for $2 trillion. But the pay for is the real challenge here. And what you have to look at, I think there's two major elements elected officials will look at when they're going to do infrastructure. Everybody agrees we want to make sure we're going to do bridge and roads, but that's more than what we want, right? What about how we build for the 21st century cities, right? The wiring. If you're putting piping down so you don't know what's going to come in the future so you can utilize it. But the time of how long it takes to build that road. Could we do reforms? My side of the aisle would care a great deal about that. Pay for, we've got a gasoline tax that wasn't indexed for inflation. Cars go further, but it's not used just for roads anymore, right? It's for mass transit, it's for bike trails and others. Now we've got electric cars on the road, so they get to drive and they don't pay for it. So the system was never set to actually work it in the end, so you have to look at something much different. Could we think outside the box? We've got a lot of federal land. We've found that we have now become energy independent, that we are now the largest exporter, and we just lifted our ban a few years ago. But in this federal land, if we are all taxpayers, that's the country's land, right? What if we open some of that up and we utilize that to pay for infrastructure? If we were going to do that, there's creative ways. And I'm not saying you do it this way, but you could think outside the box, okay? You could do a couple different ways. Why don't we bond that money ahead of the future of it now and really do things really quickly so it's not slow paced, that you can rebuild airports and others? What if you took excess property? There's a bill that's called the GAIN Act that a Democrat group and a Republican group, they both co-sponsor it. So what you do is you take excess property. We have a lot of property that we don't use, buildings we don't use. What if we sell that and say only that money goes to infrastructure in the 100th poorest districts? That's the idea. You could do a mix and match. You could do public-private partnership because there's a lot of investment out there if you wanted to go in. Now, not every city is going to want to do that if they want to do a toll or something else, but they could. And what they could do is almost start an infrastructure bank with the ones so they could keep funding in others. Because the gasoline tax is not going to sustain itself into the future. So this is the challenge. We have to answer this question before we determine the rest.
So when you were first running for Congress, you were one of 20 Republicans from California out of 53. Now you're one of 7. And you've opposed the gas tax hike that Jerry Brown had put in place. You have vigorously opposed high-speed rail. You met earlier this month with the team for Hyperloop One. Mm-hmm. So
I like Hyperloop.
You represent perhaps the most congested state in the country, and maybe perhaps as being generous. Does your solution to California's transportation problems boil down to federal lands, to a Hyperloop?
Okay,
what's the plan?
That's a great question, but let's have this discussion, okay? Very true, I opposed the increasing of gasoline tax in California. Who's in here from California? Okay, so you're going to go home shortly, right? How much is gasoline here in Chicago? $3, yeah? What do you think it is in California? No, $3.80. You're robbing if you get it there. You're way over $4. It was so shocking to the new governor, Gavin Newsom. You know what he said? He's going to get a committee together to understand why our gas prices are so high in California after they just raised the gasoline price. Now, why would I be opposed to that? If you just go back the last 5, 6, 7 years, I may be off a year, the added revenue to California's budget is the size of the entire budget of Arizona or Wisconsin. So we've had a real increase in revenue. How much money of that added revenue have we invested in infrastructure? Look, I'm a limited government person. I'm for small government, but I believe in government. I believe one of the fundamental responsibilities we have as government is infrastructure. You know how much money they put into infrastructure of all that excess? Zero. So what they did, they went and funded all these other programs and new programs and said, oh, I got no more money, so I've got to raise the tax on you. Now, who does that tax hit the most? I don't come from a wealthy community. Is it going to hurt the person that's sitting in Beverly Hills? No, but the person they may hire to come work on their yard or something else, yeah, it's going to cost them a great deal of money. It is a regressive tax. It is going to hurt those who can't afford it. And we didn't raise it by a few cents.
But you're not for revisiting the tax cuts for that Beverly Hills resident.
The tax cuts for the Beverly Hills, what do you mean?
The tax cuts that were passed in the previous Congress by
If you go to Beverly Hills, they're mad. They don't have salt, so I don't understand that point.
Well, Republicans lost quite a few seats in Orange County after Democrats campaigned on changes to the SALT deduction.
Then why did Dana Rohrabacher lose if he voted against it?
Well, after the government shut down...
No, but you had another point in that question. And I didn't get to answer
Sure.
immigration, too, because that's a big question. So just so you know what a discharge petition is. A discharge petition allows anybody to put a discharge before Congress, and if you get 218 members of Congress to sign it, why that number is special, 218 is the number you need to pass a bill on a full Congress. Then you can bring that bill directly to the floor without going through committee or anything else. Immigration is a major problem we have. They put a discharge petition because we've had a bill sitting in committee for a long time. And they were working on it, they got frustrated with the Judiciary Committee. I don't think discharge as a majority is the way to go. It's showing that you're not doing the right job in the majority because someone in your own party is doing it. You should be able to work it through committee and get it done. In the minority, it's your best option because you can't just move something through. They utilized that to get people together. By utilizing that, we got more people in a room, and we actually crafted 2 bills that we put on the floor that did deal with Dreamers, did deal with guest workers program, and it came both of them came close to passing. The problem was there wasn't one person on the other side of the aisle to vote for it. Not that some wouldn't want to vote for it, but this is where I'm not blaming one or the other, but it's what happens in the minority and what happens when you get closer to an election. You don't want something to happen because you want to beat the majority, so you try to have nothing, and you want to utilize, instead of solving a problem, you want to make that problem bigger and say, from a standpoint, if you make me the majority, I can solve it.
I still think if you and the president had given cover to Corbello, Denham, and some of the others who were pushing something that Democrats could have signed onto, you might have had a different midterm outcome, and you might have had a bill passed. But I want to ask you, after the government shut down, the president went ahead and declared a national emergency on the southern border. There was a vote taken in Congress to overturn his declaration. 13 Republicans in the House broke from you and the president. 12 Republicans in the Senate broke from you and the president, arguing that this was an unconstitutional bypassing of Congress's power of the purse. Are you concerned about the precedent that it sets for a future Democratic president who might declare a national emergency on climate change or guns?
Okay, first of all, the president has the power to do it. And he wasn't the first president to use it. It goes all the way back to '74. And if you want to go to Article 1, and you've got concerns about it in the future, it's kind of like saying, this is a 50-mile-per-hour zone. You drive 50 miles per hour, and I changed it to 25. I want to give you a ticket for something you did in the past. If you're concerned about it, if there's a school around it, you want to lower the price, then pass something for it. Currently, he has the right to do it, and as elected official, I have to uphold the law. So if he has the right to do it, yeah. If it makes it concern, I got concern with Article 1 in the future. So let's move a bill that changes the law for any future. And it would bind him too in the future of where you go. But no, he has the power to do this.
So you'd be okay with a Democratic president in the future
if that's still the law.
Congress,
now, I would argue against doing so if I disagreed with it. Same, I'd argue if I disagreed with what he was doing. But if they have the power to do it, I can't argue that they don't have the power to do it if they're not legally right to do it. So the argument would be, and it got reformed in I think it was 74. I know it was in the 70s. I might get the number off at this moment. But yeah, I think there's enough on both sides that people would get together from a position of checks and balances to change that going forward.
Well, let me ask you about another precedent-setting issue, which is if there were a Supreme Court vacancy during the election year of 2020, would you support holding off on a hearing for that nominee? I know you're in the House, not the Senate.
I
Would
wait
you?
for my answer. I have no power.
Okay.
It's the
but
Senate.
But you and Leader McConnell work together.
It wouldn't matter what I said.
Come on.
I don't have a vote.
Come on. What would you advise him? What would you advise him? Would you
I don't
support
know,
holding open and
Biden-
giving the American
Biden
people a
thought-
voice in who should sit on the court?
Biden thought at that moment you shouldn't until he was vice president. McConnell thought you shouldn't in the standpoint there. It's a hypothetical. I'm not a senator. I don't have to come up with it. It's as you take it from the place of where timing matters from when it is right before. Could it be finished? I don't know. There's not an opening today.
Okay, no position there from you. Now, on,
Well, I don't have a vote on it.
okay,
That's like I
spoken,
said, would I vote to confirm? Yeah.
spoken like a true political tactician. Okay, now on the abortion issue,
Good question, though.
you have raised, and I think this is going to be a key issue moving forward in 2020 after especially what we've seen in the South. You have taken exception to laws passed in Alabama and being considered elsewhere that do not make exceptions for rape, incest, and the life of the mother, because that's long been your position in support of those exceptions, although you are strongly pro-life. Do you fear, from a political perspective, that turning the 2020 election into a referendum on Roe could tear apart the Trump coalition? Because from looking at what Trump did in 2016, he downplayed a lot of the social issues that tended to get Republicans in trouble with secular working class voters like abortion and gay marriage, but he played up issues like trade and immigration that he had some commonalities with some working class Democrats on. But do you worry that making the 2020 election a referendum on Roe could end up tearing apart the Trump coalition?
I mean, you study that probably better than I do. I just think you raised this question, but this isn't the only question, and it's not what really started. It was in New York changed their abortion laws. And then you had a governor in Virginia. And they got to a point where what they said, if a baby survived an abortion, it shouldn't live. So the question to me was, I know people are going to have different opinions in this, family members, everybody does. I didn't think that would divide us. I thought if a child lived and survived an abortion, you'd give medical attention to that child. And so we have a bill, Born Alive, and that raises a different debate because when does life begin? And technology, we find every day the miracles of premature babies able to survive now at 20 weeks when we couldn't before. Technology helps us. I would hate for an effect that we make a discussion like this political. This is so personal on every angle of every part about it. People make this decision based upon medical. They make this decision on their faith and others. And the uniqueness of America is we believe in religious freedom and others from the standpoint. And you want people to be able to have all the information ahead of time. I think if people are going to disagree on this, a couple things we could probably agree upon. If we disagree upon it, then maybe taxpayer money should not be spent upon it. I think we could agree upon if a child survives an abortion, medically, we should help that child. I haven't read through what Alabama's done. I have the same position I've had from the beginning. I believe one of the most precious gifts God gives us is life. And I don't question somebody within there, and it's my personal belief, and I have the same belief from a standpoint of where Ronald Reagan did rape, incest, and life of the mother. It's not an easy discussion to have anyway, but I think we should be thoughtful about it. And I know there's lots of times we turn issues politically and advantage. I just hope we wouldn't on this.
Let me ask you about something else before the Supreme Court. We've been talking a lot in our seminar this quarter on the census and the citizenship question being considered added to the census questionnaire. Do you support adding a citizenship question to the census, even if it might mean, according to former census directors, career staff at the census, that it could lead to an undercount that would shortchange your home state of California?
So you're saying if you ask somebody a question, then they won't answer it?
That it
What
would
if I ask
lead
them
to
another question? What if I ask them have you seen a census questionnaire?
Yeah,
What's the basis of why we take a census?
for a
Anybody
total
know?
count
For a
of,
total
of the
count.
population.
Do we also get other data from it? Would it not be informational to us? How many people are citizens? How many people are not? How many people come from every different demographic of what we have? I mean, trees don't vote, people vote. I think people can answer a census even if they're legal or not. It's not going to cause them a problem. And
Would
I think,
you then
I think
go-
it would be good data for us to have.
Would you then go further and support apportioning seats in Congress based on citizens rather than total population, which is what some on the left fear the administration supports as an end goal? In other
Well-
words, shifting power away.
Well, think of this
from-
question. Some of you were under the age of 18. But you're over it now. Were you counted beforehand when we did the districts? Yes. So why wouldn't we still do the same? They couldn't vote, but they were still counted.
So apportioning seats based on citizens would be okay with you rather than total population?
I don't think you understood my answer that I said before.
Okay.
If you take a count and you draw districts based upon the numbers, we drew districts based upon the numbers, my understanding, even when people couldn't vote. And your question would you draw a seat even if people can't vote? Well, if you're young, you can't vote at that time and you're still counted in the count, so yeah.
Okay. According to the New York Times, the White House has requested paperwork needed to pardon several members of the military who have been accused of war crimes, including former Navy SEAL Edward Gallagher, whose former SEAL teammates plan on testifying at trial that he admitted to killing civilians, including 4 women. And your colleague, freshman Republican Representative Dan Crenshaw from Texas, who I thought was one of the most impressive Republican candidates of the cycle.
You ought to study his race if you like politics. He ran in an open seat in Texas. He doesn't have any money, very crowded Republican seat. One candidate had $7 million of their own. Another candidate was elected, had a lot of money. I think he had like 200,000. Navy SEAL, came out of nowhere. There you can get to a runoff. He makes it to the runoff by like 150 votes, and then he wins it overwhelmingly. It just proves you got a compelling issue, you can do it.
And he's got a good campaign logo, the eye patch. But he said that he supports the case going to trial. If the president were to pardon Gallagher and others, would you consider that an appropriate use of the power to pardon?
I'm not an attorney. I know the president has the power to pardon. I would always think from a standpoint, we're a rule of law. My office looks over at the Supreme Court. You look at the statue of the lady over there. She has a blindfold on and she has a scale, so it's weighted equally. I think people should have their day in court is a better way of a judgment going through this.
And so if the president were to go ahead and preempt that military trial, what would you have to say to the president?
Well, the question is, does the president have the president has the power to do that because he has the power of the pardon. And presidents use it all the time. So it's his judgment. We have given the power to a president, whoever sits in as president. So you will like and dislike who's in that office, but you have to also understand if people have given them the power, they have the right to do it. Lots of times people use it and sometimes don't. Most people will use, governors use this. Presidents usually use the pardon right before they're leaving office, and then we all get upset about it because we don't like some of them, what they've done. But we can't argue they didn't have the right to do it. I just think if you're about to go to court, it's probably best used, let the court work through.
Okay. I want to ask you about 2020 in a second because I know there's a lot of fun to get to. But one more question on matters of the House. Earlier this year, you and other Republican leaders stripped Steve King of his committee assignments, calling his comments on race inconsistent with the party of Lincoln. I think you got credit from both sides of the aisle for that. You've also said that anti-Semitism is on the rise in Congress. You support...
Not just in Congress, around the world.
And you support bringing Senate Bill 1 to the floor via a discharge petition to combat the BDS movement. And you've also called on Democrats to more sharply condemn Representative Ilhan Omar for her comments. And I guess my question is, what would you say to people who point out that in 2016 you did support a candidate who openly called for a religious test to ban people from entering the country?
Who was that?
President Trump came out and said in the fall of 2015 that he supported a temporary ban on Muslims from entering the country.
So what's your question?
So what would your response be to, well, first of all,
Your first response, was it Steve
let me-
King? Was it Omar? Was it Trump?
let me just ask you this. If there were ever a presidential candidate who came out and said
We had
they
this debate
supported...
during the president. We'd have these texts back and forth, just so you know.
Sure. But if there were ever a candidate for president who said they supported a temporary ban on Jewish people from entering the country, is there any circumstance under which you'd ever support that candidate?
Another hypothetical. So let's deal with what we have.
Does
before.
that really require a hypothetical?
No,
Just to answer the question,
listen,
no?
No, but listen to the point of what you're saying. You just asked 4 different questions, so let me walk through them, and then people can understand where I am. First of all, I do not agree with one banning somebody, and if you watch the history of America, there's a very good exhibit of things we should have done different before World War II, when Jews were trying to leave and not being able to come to America. One thing I believe about America, strive for a more perfect union. I became leader, and there was a member of our conference that made statements that I thought went against what the Republican Party stands for. As leader, you have different things and responsibilities that you get asked all these questions, even about the Senate and everything else. One thing you have to know about me, my family were not Republicans. I chose to be in the Republican Party. And so I kind of feel like my beliefs are strong based upon I chose to go someplace different than my entire family. And there's a couple reasons why. If you go in my office, I have this great big portrait of Abraham Lincoln. I think the greatest challenge ever to our Constitution was the Civil War. Just last week, I participated in a ceremony celebrating the 19th Amendment, 100 years. Do you know when the 19th Amendment first started and who first introduced it? It wasn't 100 years ago. It was a Republican senator from California that happened on a train ride run into Susan B. Anthony. And Susan B. Anthony had just gotten arrested because she tried to vote. So he introduced, his name was Sargent, he introduced the Anthony Amendment, the same 29 words that came out to be the 19th Amendment. And it didn't get a vote. It didn't get a vote for 9 years. It didn't pass. For 40 straight years, they kept introducing it. And then a Republican man from Illinois introduced it and became law. Same day they introduced it, May 21st, became law, had a special session. There's some things about the party of what I love and why I joined it that I think I should stand up for. And I think if you stay silent on certain things, you become complacent on certain things. So I did go to steering, and I did remove Steve King from his committees. It was a vote of the steering committee and the conference. We will readdress it next Congress. When it comes to Omar and when it comes to BDS, you know what BDS is? Boycott, divestment, and sanctions. Going directly after Israel, not wanting Israel to be there. So this bill passed the Senate 77 to 23. Not very many bills passed 77. Chuck Schumer is the Democratic leader on the other side. He not only just voted for it, he co-sponsored it. It comes to the House, they don't even schedule it for a committee. So we do a discharge petition. Yesterday on the floor, we have what is called a motion to recommit. So I put it onto a motion to recommit. It didn't pass. I think only 12 or 13 Democrats voted for it at the end. I wouldn't support somebody picking and choosing based upon race, religion, and others. I do think from a perspective, if you watched what had transpired, there was a challenge of something that, battle and a war that was happening in Syria. People don't have the passports, and what we have found from the intel reports, this is where terrorists would utilize to come through and come up. A number of them have been stopped and others. So is it appropriate in those situations of war to screen? I think from a security point of view there is. A term that someone would use would be wrong, but an area, not based upon race or others, but what is happening in that area of war, we've watched the world be different by this. And so I think a caution of screening of who they are, from the intel reports we've gotten others, I think was appropriate. I'll give you one example. I come from California. There was an individual who was a terrorist who murdered an individual in Iraq, was living in Sacramento, was a part of Al-Qaeda, and he got through. We know what a few people can do inside this country if they want to harm us.
Okay, we're gonna.
I don't think that's choosing based upon a religion or others.
I know we're going to get to your questions in a second. I just want to ask you to handicap the 2020 field before we do that.
On the Democrat side or the Republican side?
On the Democratic side.
Okay.
Look, I agree with you. There's no Republican primary on the presidential level in 2020.
Okay, let me give it, and you tell me if I'm right or wrong.
Okay.
He's very smart. He's good. He studies this. I talk to him a lot. I like to call him when I'm right. He's going to be wrong. I remember this. We have the special election. I said we were going to win. He said we were going to lose. And throughout the night, as the votes are coming in, he would not say I was right. He said, "This county's still out. This county's still out."
Which special is this?
I remember I was on vacation. Which one were we having? Is more recently.
Yeah.
Oh, was it Norman in South Carolina?
Oh, no, it was the other one that night. Oh, Georgia 6.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I was right. He was wrong. Yeah. But lots of times.
That's rare.
Except when we won the majority. Okay.
We got.
Okay, let me go. Democrat majority. Okay. The first thing you want to look at is don't look at the candidates. You look at the time and place of where we are. That matters a lot. You also want to look at structure. Structure dictates behavior. I'm not an expert on the Democratic primary, but one thing I do know is they changed part of the Democratic primary. They no longer have the superdelegate on the first round, and that will matter. Superdelegates are like an insurance policy because they're elected officials, because they can go in and they could all decide on one person. People would argue the reason they took it away, that Bernie got robbed last time. The other thing you want to look at is the process of what comes first. They moved California up. California is not a winner-take-all. There was an early sign of Barack Obama being able to beat Hillary Clinton, even though she was winning big states. Barack Obama won every state that had a caucus, so he was better organized. California is one that I would watch, because you got Kamala Harris, who's a very qualified candidate. She's from that state, but I just did a poll in my own district, and she's not winning it. From my district, because you get your delegates by congressional district, and then they're not all equal the same. So somebody could utilize their money picking up some delegates and not spending a lot in the more expensive areas. I mean, it will be interesting to see if somebody's better prepared. Beto O'Rourke was did very well, even though he lost, right? But Mayor Pete has kind of filled that void, but O'Rourke had a good night at CNN. Biden seems to be running high in the polls, but no disrespect or any respect, but I think Biden is more a little example of Jeb Bush. He's got a high name ID because Democrats will think he can win. He's been there before, but I don't think he has a strong base that stays with him.
But to be fair, Jeb Bush wasn't at like the high 30s or 40% in the early polls. So if it were to be Joe, because let's say no other candidate is able to break through their 15% threshold to get delegates consistently, how would you advise President Trump to prosecute the case against Joe Biden? Because I know you'd like for this election to be a contest between socialism and freedom, as you've said.
It will be.
But how do you prosecute that case against a more mainstream Democrat?
Okay, see, he's hoping he wins. I didn't get to finish my answer.
I'm not hoping anyone wins.
No, but they make a good line. I don't think Biden's going to be the nominee. I don't think the president's going to have, and I could be wrong. If you go back to the last presidential election, President Trump hadn't even announced yet. So it's still early, and any advice someone gives you now, they're totally wrong. Because at any given moment, somebody could become the nominee. Santorum won, 13 states against Romney. Marco Rubio was on the cusp of becoming our nominee, but he collapsed in one debate. The pressure of running for president is tremendous, and at any given time, you don't know what happens and what goes viral and what doesn't. Fresh faces, I think, have potential. If I was a betting person today and I had to pick based upon the knowledge I have at this moment in time, who's going to have the resources to carry through, I think there's a better chance that Bernie Sanders is the Democratic nominee than that, because he has a base that will stay with him. He raises good money online so he can compete. I think Elizabeth Warren has set up her campaign wrong, so I don't think she maintains. I think Joe Biden, how do you go in a stage of Democrats and where the Democratic Party is today? Not being a Democrat, I believe, is angry because they want to win. They felt they should have won last time. I think they are further to the left than they were before, as the Republican Party had gone further to the right. So Joe Biden's going to stand up there and say, I voted for the Iraq War. I mean, he's going to have to apologize for things. Where Bernie Sanders is kind of the party has moved more towards him. So I think he and don't discount, he has already done this once, campaigning. It could be a little like a Bob Dole, right? He has better knowledge. And I think, and I can be wrong, but I've had Democrats tell me, well, he was robbed last time. He really would have won, but they cheated him within. And I don't know, maybe Mayor Pete rises or Kamala Harris. She's got a good campaign in South Carolina. It's still early. There's a lot of potential out there.
All right, I want to get to questions from students, so please,
He
I know
took
there's...
more than 3, I'm sorry.
All right, and
Tell me where you're from and what's your
from
major.
and your name.
I'm Adam. I'm a second-year neuroscience major from Iowa City, Iowa.
You're much smarter than I'll ever be right there.
I'm kind of amazed that you brought up the SS St. Louis, the ship of Jewish refugees that was turned away from the U.S., and then proceeded to defend Trump's Muslim ban. Because the logic of the two things are very similar. Anti-Semites argued that there might be Nazis hidden among the refugees, which is sort of similar to the argument that there's terrorists hidden among these refugees that we haven't allowed into our country based on the basis of their religion. Trump has also, shown extreme xenophobia against Mexicans. He said that Mexican...
Okay, I want to get a couple questions in, so why don't we leave it there and let the
you
speaker,
don't like the
leader
president,
answer.
but maybe I didn't stipulate my answer well enough. The difference here, and if you check us too, I think his screening was held up in the courts, was it not? I think it was held up. It's a screening, it's not turning away. So individuals will still have the ability to come, they just have to be screened before they come. That's different than what was happening prior.
So I guess my question more broadly...
And it's a region. It's not based upon a religion.
I have to go to the next question. I'm sorry.
Thank you, though.
Yes, it is a matter that the Supreme Court did decide.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't judge on that.
Tell us your name and where you're
So
from.
I'm Michael. I'm from the Republican hotbed of San Francisco. My question is pretty simple. The president has recently been, heating up in a war, so to speak, with the House over subpoenas and oversight. What do you think the negative consequences of that are? Do you think it sets a poor precedent? And is there a better way to resolve anything that is currently going on?
That's a great question. And what you should see is this is not unusual. Even when it comes to a contempt, what's unusual is the timing. And if you study, there was a contempt vote in the Bush administration and in the Obama administration. And if you study both of those, they took 18 and 22 months. So you tried to work out and everywhere not there. In this case, there wasn't. It's very short-lived. This is a little different than those two because you already, one, had an investigation from a Mueller report. Now, if you want to judge the president on his participation in that, he never declared executive privilege. He didn't hold his administration from participating many hours, his family from participating. I think what the question lies now is, are they trying to relitigate something that has been done already from that point? I think sometimes when you have these challenges, and I'm a big believer in Article 1, you kind of negotiate them out. But if you look at what Nadler, not going these 18 months ago, we had a hearing in the Judiciary Committee that Chairman Nadler's on. And what you do, you get witnesses from both sides of the aisle, and these were legal scholars. So a question was given to all 4 legal scholars from the Republican and Democratic side. The subpoena that committee sent to Attorney General Barr, for him to uphold the subpoena, would he had to have broken the law? You know what the answer was? Yes, from all of them. So what that committee asked, and this is important because this question will come before the House to vote for contempt. So this committee asked our Attorney General, you have to either break the law or I'll hold you in contempt. Well, I want our Attorney General to uphold the law. And so that's getting built into some of this, but there's a way that we should probably work that out. They haven't brought to the floor yet, but that would be a bad vote for anybody saying, I'm going to hold the Attorney General in contempt because he wouldn't break the law.
Leader McCarthy, thank you. My name's Shalee. I'm a first year at the business school from the conservative hotbed of New York City.
Excellent.
I have a question about excess property and land. You mentioned the DOD actually maintains it as 25% more bases than it needs, and service chiefs have testified before Congress that they're getting fielded platforms and extending the life of platforms that they also don't need. Is there a way to realign the incentives of Congress to create value for the warfighter and the taxpayer?
Very much so. I mean, we should start thinking outside the box. Let's take this part, but let's go to a different place and let's envision. The autonomous car is pretty much here, and it will be here in your lifetime. The utilization of your car is one of the least things you do. So 2 things are going to happen. If you have a car and you go to work in your car, you don't need a parking lot right by your work, right? Because it's autonomous. It could drop you off, and it could drive way away, and it could park somewhere else. So how we have building and permits will be different. Or your car can go to work for you all during that time and others. Having all that, maybe the property that we have, that government has, but not utilizing it, is it the best use? Because what happens is the country has been created and grown through these years. We may have some prime real estate that we're not using at all that could be fill-in, that cities could be planned better. The money could go back to the taxpayer. What happens when government owns a property? There's no tax revenue on it. But when it goes back into the private sector, there's tax revenue for the city and others. Technology is going to change every element of our life, and we should plan different. And our laws should actually be modernized for that. So that's a great question. Yes.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Yeah.
All right, make it a home run.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Catherine. I'm a first year at the college.
Where are you from?
Connecticut.
All right, great.
Another conservative hotbed. So I'm wondering, when on the topic of abortion, which I want to continue that conversation because it's so relevant today. We recently had a big argument about it here on campus. So you said that taxpayer money shouldn't be delegated towards something that the American people disagree about. And this is a response that we see coming often from the Republican Party. And I'm wondering, how do you is this dangerous territory to wander into, and how do you reconcile that argument with other issues that affect life and that from which disagreement stems, from car safety regulation to military intervention?
Great question. And see, this is where people can agree and disagree. And first of all, thank you for your question, and think of the manner in which you presented it. This is an issue that has divided a great deal of us, and people have strong opinions on both sides. If people have such strong opinions on both sides, and you're going to utilize taxpayer money for it, and because you're taking that from individuals, I think that's a place that we will probably come together and not spend. When it comes to military intervention, that's a decision that Congress votes as a whole, whether we go to war. But is the question, as even a person in limited government, is government not have, because as I read the Constitution and the preamble, we have a responsibility to protect. So if we agree with the military or not, we're supposed to protect. We're supposed to have borders, we're supposed to do others. How much we spend on that we can disagree upon, but not the fact that that is a role for government. I kind of thought the country has come to a point, because technology has determined other things for us, when a child can survive. And if you looked at within polling and others, the idea of a baby surviving an abortion and not providing medical care for them, I think that's a place most people agree upon. But there is going to be differences within. But that's how I come to my belief about funding and others, that military intervention, Congress is going to decide, are we going to war or not? But do we fund the military? Yeah, that's a responsibility government have. But we debate that. We were debating it this week in our private meetings, how much money should be spent on that.
All right, I want to close with one question that, because you and I are such house junkies, I just have to ask. And that's, if you were to look at the Republican conference in the House and the Democratic caucus in the House, and you were to point at one or two people who you think could be future presidential candidates, watching these people.
This is the worst question. Because when I pick two, I have a conference of 200. 197 others are mad at me because...
That's why I'm asking it. You're on the hot seat here, leader. But also, you don't have to
I'll tell you this.
play favorites with your own
thinks
side.
They'll make a good president. No, there are some really sharp people in the House that I think could be president. But the other question is they have to want to. And there's people in the House, I think, their best is probably not president, but they should be Secretary of Defense. I'll give you one. I think Liz Cheney would be a fantastic, probably first female Secretary of Defense or Secretary of State. She studies foreign policy well. She carries herself well. She's got a bright future no matter what she does. And she has a bright future in the House. She has a potential in the Senate. I mean, she's got a bright future. Dan Crenshaw has an unbelievable ability. Michael Waltz, Will Hurd, Elise Stefanik. Elise Stefanik, prior to the last election, was the first woman, or the youngest woman ever elected to Congress. And she is so smart. There's sharp people on both sides. Joe Kennedy has a bright future. Look, people assume if you're Republican and Democrat, then you dislike one another. Joe Kennedy is one of my best friends. We disagree. His grandmother calls me Ethel. She'll tell me what she thinks I should do and then congratulates when I do things she thinks right or not. I mean, I respect him greatly. We work out in the mornings, and I'm the before guy, he's the after guy. But when Joe and Lauren had their first baby, Ellie, Judy and I sent him a baby gift. We gave her a rocking elephant with her name on it, right? And Ellie makes the elephant noise. Ellie would come to my office, and she makes the elephant noise. And one day, I think we were breaking the rules, but Joe and I were sitting together on the floor, and and Lauren's FaceTiming him, and they happened to be in, I think, Ellie's room, and Ellie sees us, and so Ellie runs over, and she gets on that elephant. She's just rocking. It was a good gift, right? And so I look at Joe, and I said, look at that, the first Republican Kennedy. So I have hope, If you don't meet other people, and the one thing I ask everybody, what's happened in society today, we don't get news, we get opinion. And we watch it not to learn, but to reaffirm what we already think. But we have a government that's designed to find compromise. Now, I'm going to fight for my principles, but I know at the end of the day, I'm not going to get 100% of what I want. But if it's moving the country forward, come together. But we've come to a point in a country where we don't trust people, where we get angry with them. I've lost friends, I've lost family members because President Trump won. Well, I didn't change who I was, but that's not healthy for us. I just sat on a podcast. He and I have differences of opinion, and we went back and forth with ideas, but afterwards we shake hands. You can disagree with one another, and there's going to be elections I win and elections I lose. But the first thing we should all be are Americans, And we are so fortunate to live here. I just took this trip to Latin America. So I was on Colombia and the border of Venezuela. 50,000 people a day come across. And I'm sitting talking to these families. And 5,000 stay. And you ask them where they come from. They'll walk for a day to go buy milk, and they do it every 4 days. And it's a husband and wife and a child, and you can tell they're doing it just for their child. And when I walked away, I was with some other members, bipartisan and bicameral. The only difference between those three people and us is where they were born. There was no other difference. They cared most about their child. They were sacrificing. we have a unique opportunity, and that's why I firmly believe that America is more than a country, we're an idea. And when we foster our ideas around the world is safer, the world is stronger, and there's more freedom. And that's positive. And I never question which party you're in, whether you support and believe in America. You may have a different philosophy than I do, but I would not question whether you believe in the Constitution. Thank you very much.
That was a hopeful note. That was a hopeful note to end on. I want to thank you, Leader McCarthy. Over the years, it's been a pleasure to get to know you. And regardless of whether we've disagreed on politics or our political forecast, you've always kept an open line of communication. I want to thank you for that.
You want to know how powerful he is? Now, he's very smart, and the thing I like about him, we'll always talk, and even when we disagree. He was right on this election much more than I was. But there was a study done after the election. This is how powerful he is. When he would move an election on a rating, more money went to it. Meaning that if he moved an incumbent down, money came to that other one. So I try to persuade him otherwise. But now I want him to move other incumbents down.
Well, if only I could move money in the congressional budget around. Thank you so very much for visiting the university.
I just want to say
okay.
one thing,
okay.
Which is this institute is predicated on that notion that we all are, in fact, Americans, and that we need to hear from people across the political spectrum. You didn't have to be here, and we deeply appreciate you being here. And whether one agrees or not with everything that you've said, it's important that we have these conversations. And I just wanted to thank you and commend you for taking time out on the beginning of a holiday weekend to stop off here and spend time with us.
And just so you know, I didn't come for any other reason but here. And now I'm going to fly to California.
Well, thanks for making a stop here. I want to let everyone know we're going to let the leader exit before we exit. But please join me one more time in thanking Leader Kevin McCarthy.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.